For years then, we haven't even copyrighted our material. We allow people to copy it, to give it away. That's what we want.
We want to look at real evidences.
The plural of evidence is evidence.
That exist out in creation.
I'd call it nature or the universe, but I'm with you.
But also are verified by the truths of Scripture.
And now you lost me again. Welcome to Paulogia, where a former Christian takes a look at the claims of Christians.
There are unbelieving paleontologists, geologists, and scientists that reject what the Bible says.
Most scientists, believing or unbelieving, don't pay any attention to what the Bible says when they go out into the field or the lab. Just like most baristas, equestrian riders, taxi drivers, or car salesmen aren't affected by their faith position when they go to work.
A lot of people will say, Ben, those geologists and paleontologists and archaeologists, they're all really smart. They're the experts. We need to go to the experts.
Yeah, it may sound crazy, but I like to talk to doctors about medical conditions, mechanics about my car troubles, and lawyers about legal issues.
But here's what I want you to do. Take just a moment. I agree they're very smart. They have a lot of knowledge.
How kind of you to agree to that.
Take what they've said about the idea of a worldwide flood not happening, put that on hold for just a second, and examine some of this evidence. I think you'll find it fascinating.
So we have Eric Hovind, a man with no post-secondary education of any kind. We have Ben Shetler with his master's in Christian apologetics, whatever that means, and myself with a Bachelor of Commerce and Computer Science. So none of us are trained scientists, laymen at best. So the three of us, we're all just going to put this idea about the flood not happening on hold to be fascinated by something. Eric admits that people who study this for a living find the information not compelling, but maybe I should give it a go? All right.
Hydrologic sorting, which of course is when you get all materials and sediments and water together and it's sorted according to water, hydrologically. Now, we find this all over the world. The sedimentary layers that are laid down are all laid down in water. That's what sedimentary means, is laid down in water.
The word sedimentary actually means made of sediment, not laid down in water. In fact, the sediment for these rock layers can be deposited by things other than water, like wind, ice, glaciers, or any type of mass movement. Because it relates to the claim Eric is about to make, it's worth noting that the kind of layers we see in the geologic column are not what you would see from a single catastrophic event. From a single event, we always get a single layer. Let's revisit Potholer 54's definitive work on this.
To test the Hovind theory, add different flood detritus to a jar or a small tank. A few stones, some sand, red clay, weathered clay, humus-rich garden soil, natural topsoil from the forest, and a bit of vegetation. Add water and stir. Here's the tank again a day later, and we can count the number of layers it settled into. 1. What you get in this single layer is just a textbook example of what's called graded bedding. Coarser grains and heavy gravels tend to be found at the bottom, and smaller and lighter material like silts and muds are generally found nearer the top. It may look as though there are 2 or 3 separate layers here, but on closer inspection you can see the different grain sizes and the blurring of the boundaries. What you don't get are what we see in rocks all around us. Clearly defined sedimentary layers, each made of different material and in no particular order.
Now Eric is going to argue from both sides of his mouth here. On one hand, he believes that the layers formed in some kind of defiance of hydrologic sorting, due to earthquakes or crashing waves or some other ad hoc explanation. He's going to argue that at the same time the dirt defied such sorting, the fossils of living organisms somehow obeyed the sorting. Well, I'll let him make the claim.
And what we observe is we observe hydrologic sorting. For example, dense animals such as clams are typically found at the bottom.
First off, kudos to Eric for correctly identifying density.
I'm your density.
Is the relevant factor for buoyancy and not pure weight alone.
It's time now to play Will It Float?
And here, by the way, is the home game of Will It Float. Everything contained in one box so you can have just as much fun at home as we do every Friday night here in the theater.
An object will float when its mass is lighter than the mass of the volume of water it would displace. This allows massive structures like aircraft carriers to stay on top of the water, while a small pebble will sink. I searched as best as I could, but was unable to find some kind of table or studies of relative densities of the various animals in the animal kingdom. But the example Eric gave for dense animals was clams, so let's talk about clams for a bit. I'm not sure what Eric means by bottom, but as I look at the geologic column, his statement would lead me to believe that most of the clam fossils are found in the Cambrian or Ordovician layers. However, that's simply not the case. Clams are found in every layer from the Cambrian right up to the Cenozoic and beyond. If this hydrologic sorting process were efficient and explanatory, we would not find an abundance of clams in the upper layers, but we do. Or perhaps, like the sedimentary particulates, Eric thinks we should expect a gradient of fewest on top to most on the bottom. While we see some clams in the Cambrian layer, there are significantly more of them in the Devonian layers above that, and massively more in the Permian layers. This directly contradicts Eric's claim. But even worse than that, a 1987 U.S. Geological Survey reports that the oldest fossil clams are generally the smallest. Most Cambrian species are just large enough to be seen without magnification. The sizes of the clam species grew over time in successively higher layers, culminating in some 6-foot diameter clams from the Cretaceous period. However, we're not just talking about floating here. We really need to consider hydrodynamic drag, the resistance to the motion of a body by the fluid around it. This is directly proportional to its cross-sectional area and its drag coefficient. When objects with the same density and the same drag coefficient move through a fluid, they are sorted according to size, meaning that the small clams would be found higher in the fossil record than the large one, which directly contradicts what we see. And this delineation is not merely size, but clearly species. These aren't mama clams and baby clams. Each layer has changes in overall shape, roundness of posterior, ligamental cavity, and shell ornamentation. Strict separation. Water does not sort by shell patterns, but time does.
Light animals, such as birds with their feathers and hollow bones, are typically found at the top.
Unlike the clam claims, Eric could be said to be correct about the gradient ordering of bird fossils. There are a few feathered bird-like creatures, like Archaeopteryx, in the Jurassic layers from 150 million years ago. Then there are progressively more in the Cretaceous layers, like the Ichthyornis, and a proliferation of more modern birds after the KT boundary. But Eric is attributing this to hollow bones, what scientists call pneumatic bones. But it has long been established that at least 2 clades of dinosaurs also have pneumatic bones. The theropods, like the T-Rex and raptors from which birds evolved, but also the sauropods, like the Brachiosaur or the Diplodocus, the largest dinosaurs we know of. And just like my previous example of an aircraft carrier, their massive size and hollow bones would have been perfect recipe for an extremely buoyant creature. If Eric were right about his hollow bones theory, then we wouldn't see theropods and sauropods only in lower strata below the KT boundary. They would also be near the top. At very least, we wouldn't see them consistently in the same strata as Ornithischia, dinosaurs like Triceratops, Stegosaurus, and Ankylosaurs, that have cancellous, or non-hollow, bone. Pneumatic bones and cancellous bones would be in fully different layers if hydrologic sorting were really at play. But they're not. And like the clams, this hydrologic sorting idea doesn't begin to address the rigid specificity of the more primitive species of a clade found in lower layers and more adapted species of the same clade always found in higher layers. But are bones really the primary factor in determining body buoyancy and drag? As I mentioned, unfortunately there is no established chart of body density across the animal kingdom, let alone buoyancy or drag. It would definitely be a strange thing to study. But the general factors that influence body flotation is well studied by forensic science, and there are general principles that hold true. The most influencing factor is not the bones, but the amount of fat on a creature, as fat is the primary body component with density less than water.
What we see all around the world in the geologic column.
Now wait just a minute, Eric. Did you just admit that we see a geologic column?
Right here in the textbooks. That is the only place in the entire world you can find the geologic column. It doesn't exist anywhere.
So do we see a geologic column or not, Eric?
What we see all around the world in the geologic column is hydrologic sorting taking place. Indications of a single worldwide flood.
As far as flood indicators go, this one seems like nothing more than confirmation bias. If hydrologic sorting were true, we'd need to accept that the flood water sorted rock, dirt, and sediment to make layers, while at the same time sorting the plants and animals as if it was one giant uniform layer. We'd have to ignore the clear evidence that each layer shares fossils of animals with massively different buoyancy, and that certain animal types were somehow sorted exclusively within that layer with no exceptions. We'd have to ignore principles of hydrologic drag when it comes to sorting clams by size. This hydrologic sorting claim not only doesn't in any way explain the observed ordering of fossils, it completely misrepresents the undeniably observed ordering of the fossils. These are lies of omission. Eric cherry-picks 2 samples out of millions, clams and birds, and even those don't correctly demonstrate the principle he wants to assert. hydrologic sorting of fossils is not a thing.
Yes. All right, bring up the deal and let's play Will It Float. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, girls. Nice to see you. How are you? Anytime, dump it in there. And it sinks. That's how we play Will It Float. We'll see you later.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to be notified when new science videos or ham and egg news episodes arrive, please tap subscribe and also hit the notification bell. Thank you as always to my Patreon supporters, whose generosity helps make both the quality and quantity of my videos possible. If you'd like to join them, please check out the link in the description. As always, until next time, later.